Greetings, everyone. It's wonderful to welcome you to our panel today. I am Joanne Barefoot. I am CEO and co-founder of AIR, the Alliance for Innovative Regulation. We're a nonprofit working on bringing great technology into finance and financial regulation, and thrilled to be here today. It's always great to be able to work with the GBBC. We have a great panel for you talking about mining. 2021 has really been a turning point in crypto all across the board. Almost every sphere of activity saw huge changes, and one of them certainly is in mining in terms of both the geopolitical trends and the environmental and climate trends that have been surfacing. So we're going to talk to you about that, and to start us off, I'm going to ask our panel to self-introduce to you, and then we're going to jump into the conversation. So let me start with Brian Brooks. Would you introduce yourself?
Absolutely, Joanne. Thanks so much for having me, everybody. I am CEO of Bitfury Group, one of the founding members of this august organization here, and very happy to be here. I served in a prior life as acting controller of the currency in the last administration, where I was in charge of administering the federal banking system in the United States, and did a lot of work on crypto, not just Bitcoin, but a lot of the DeFi and layer 2 protocols that had Bitcoin as a reference asset. And so mining obviously is critically important to all of that work. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. And Tanya Woods.
Sure. Nice to be here as well. Big fan of GBBC, and hi, Brian and my colleagues. I'm the General Counsel and Corporate Secretary for HUD-8. HUD-8 is leading the digital finance revolution and advancing decentralized systems with high performance computing. We have a very unique mixture of experience, leadership, vision, and innovation that set us apart. And we believe in decentralized systems that promote financial inclusion, sustainability, powering the fourth industrial revolution. And our mission is to create value for generations to come. I am also the former head of Canada's first digital chamber of commerce and a former trade negotiator. So excited to share some thoughts with you today.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Jerry.
Thank you. Excited to be here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of VCD Digital. I am a former Wall Street banker, turned crypto entrepreneur. I jumped into crypto in 2021, and I started a crypto mining business, which is the topic today. And right now I have 5,000 mining machines. We have about 100 megawatts of sites under various stages of construction. So we are looking at exponential expansion.
Fantastic, thank you. And last but not least, Emma.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emma Todd. I'm the director of tokens.com, which is a publicly traded company, and they invest in revenue generating crypto assets linked to DeFi, NFTs, metaverse, which everybody knows about, metaverse real estate, and staking. I'm also the CEO of MH Data Systems. We've been in mining since 2018, and we help organizations find equipment, power, and land. My company also provides operation for mining facilities. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So let's start with the geopolitical landscape here. Again, 2021 brought a lot of changes, including crackdowns on mining in China and the relocation of a lot of mining activities, and also chip shortages. Jerry, let me start with you. Tell us where we are, what are the most important trends here, and where we seem to be headed.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess to put some numbers to illustrate what happened in 2021, so the audience has some context, is basically China banned all crypto mining, potentially all crypto activities in China, inside its borders. One thing to keep in mind is China accounted for about 2/3 of global mining, either right before the crackdown or for a long period of time. So it's I would call it a seismic shift for crypto mining. So it's a very, very significant event. Presents a lot of opportunities, I think, for other countries to take mining. As for 2022, I think it will be a continuation of migration of mining activities from China or Asia into the, I would say, first world countries. That's US, obviously is number one, and Canada, and potentially some Nordic countries. Also, for the older generation miners that are less effective, we are seeing a lot of migration into South America, such as Venezuela, Paraguay, that has really cheap hydrogen electricity. The other thing is, what happened in 2021 is on the ESG space. I think before 2021, there was less than 40 countries committing to some sort of a concrete carbon emission reduction. Throughout 2021 and also the COP26, right now we got over 130 countries committing to very concrete carbon emission reduction. So that's going to affect crypto mining at a certain point. Maybe soon, maybe, but it's going to come. So those are a couple of things that I think that could be important to watch.
We're going to drill down on the ESG and climate issue in a little more depth in a few minutes. But before we do that, let me ask other panelists if you want to put some things on the table in terms of what you see as the top trends shaping mining starting in 2022.
Well, Joanne, I would just jump in and echo and maybe amplify a couple of things that were just said. So one is the global semiconductor shortage is a really big deal in two different ways. So one is obviously it's difficult to deploy new equipment and to build out more mining sites in a world where equipment is hard to come by. And at this point, I don't want to suggest that we're in a true monopoly pricing environment, but at this point, there is one company that really dominates the entire space and is able to charge accordingly. So that's not great for markets. But even more important, the chip shortage is kind of directly related to some of these ESG concerns, because with every new generation of mining chip, the energy efficiency increases significantly. In fact, in advance of some congressional testimony that I'm giving tomorrow, I was just reviewing our own chip efficiency increases over the years and found that between 2013, when Bitfury released its first mining chip, and our current generation mining chip that's coming out in just a few months, the energy efficiency improvement was 6,100%. Right. So it's very bad for the environment when people can, I mean, relatively speaking, when people continue to mine using equipment from 1 or 2 or 3 generations ago, relative to the current environment where energy throughput is so much lower.
Thank you.
Yeah. So to add to that quickly, Brian, did you see the news that Intel is now trying to dive into the game? I think they want to take some of the company that shall not be named, do they kind of want to take a little bit of their pie, because we all know they have the full pie, and so that was kind of interesting to see. But I will let you know, in my opinion, one of the reasons why people are still using some of those older equipment is that they take a licking and keep on ticking. I'm still shocked that the ones from 2017 and 2018, they're still going. It's a testament to how they were built. But when I look at what's being done now and what's coming out in July, those are definitely more energy efficient and people really are trying to use them. So what I'm seeing they're doing is they're migrating those to other countries that are not first world countries, where if they get seized, it's unfortunate, but they're going to be okay. Whereas, they want to leave the newer generation equipment to the first world countries where they know that they're going to be safe and it's going to be okay. But it's really interesting to see how things are, developing these days, just in terms of mining and where people are mining. Yeah,
Tanya, let me ask you to either jump in on the big trends or go to further to this question of where is the mining going? What are we seeing as the emerging sites, and what are the factors that are shaping that?
I mean, obviously, for mining, power pricing is a big deal. So keeping an eye on, trends in tariffs, reporting requirements, etc., as it relates to energy is going to be huge. So we're watching, we're up in Canada, but we're watching very carefully what Chairman Gensler and company are thinking through down in the US as far as reporting. We'll get into that later, I'm sure. But, you know, where we can find sustainable power, number one, because we acknowledge we want to be, you know, advancing sustainability priorities. It's very, very important for not only our company, I think it's safe to say it is a priority for our community at large globally. But we're also going to see, I think, diversification. I mean, the reality is companies are going to continue to evolve and expand. We're seeing a lot of narrative toward high performance computing. Certainly our company is out front and has been for quite some time in that space. And partnerships and advancements are going to continue. I mean, we are starting to see, certainly last year with the infrastructure bill, and it was the one thing that wasn't really mentioned. It almost signaled a tipping point that, you know, the US government's taking this sector generally at large very seriously. I think Brian's probably the best place to give the ins and outs on that one, but quite seriously. And, you know, now it's time to really think through, how do we ensure we are communicating with government clearly and that they understand the opportunities that are actually right in their backyard and have been for some time. So, you know, we've seen a lot more engagement, certainly from the US reaching out to us, you know, state governments asking us, you know, what it would take for us to go down there and operate. And we're also seeing increased engagement up here in Canada, just amongst our own regulators. So I think the conversation at the country level is expanding in a very pragmatic and I think exciting and long overdue way. And that will just lead to more partnerships and innovation. So, you know, you do see countries, I mean, I think Jerry touched on it, South American countries, you know, really starting to be bold. We saw that last year, adopting national currencies. But we're also seeing, you know, countries like Dubai. Dubai is really making some interesting moves. Nobody really mentioned that one, but interesting moves to attract crypto talent, as are some Caribbean countries. I mean, let's just not ignore Barbados and our friends in the Caribbean, who are equally really ready to play with an opportunity to advance their geopolitical, their economic, and their social positions in the world.
And what are they doing, this is to any of you, to attract mining for countries that want to become hubs? Do you have analysis of that?
Oh, I can just come in for a second, Joanne, and just say I just got back from a trip to the Middle East just 3 or 4 weeks ago, and the attraction in places like that is that there's basically power at cost available depending on the kind of deals that you're trying to do. And so particularly if you're doing renewable deals where there's large scale solar deployments across North Africa and in the UAE, it's a great way to get 2-cent power versus 4 cents in Texas or 7 cents in other parts of the country and the world. So it's a combination of, it's an ESG play, you've got a sovereign that is very interested in building out renewables, and it's a way to generate outsized returns because of basically free power.
Great.
I will say I'm also seeing that, Tanya touched on the Caribbean countries. I'm seeing that, and it's kind of interesting. Trinidad's offering really great power, and people are initially interested in it. But at the end of the day, I'm seeing that they're pulling back because at the end of the day, they do want to do work in a first world country. So they consider Trinidad to not be a first world country. So they're a little bit hesitant about sending their mining equipment there. I've also been approached by Nigeria. Nigeria is like, hey, we're happy and willing to do mining, but people are still hesitant to send it there. So I think once, and also I'm seeing that with Paraguay. Paraguay, you can't beat that. It's a 2-cent power, but will you see your equipment again? People are a little bit worried about that. So I think once everything's been exhausted in the first world countries in North America, as well as in the Nordic countries, then we're going to probably see a shift to the other parts of the world. But for now, it's kind of interesting because they're saying we have cheap power, we're giving it to you. We just want to see that you'll invest. And some of the larger companies are saying, no, we can't do it. We've spent so much on our mining equipment, we just can't afford to not be sure that it's going to be safe.
Yeah, I would concur with that. It's going to be for public companies. It's going to be harder to deploy in countries that do not have property rights protections. Everybody, just remind everybody of the Genesis mining. I think they lost 40,000 miners in China from 4 years ago. They won a lawsuit, I think a month ago, to get it all back, but 4 years of mining is a lot of loss of revenue.
And what about further consolidation among mining companies? What trends are you seeing there?
I can jump in first. I mean, there's a lot of, it seems like there's a flurry of SPAC activities right now. It seems like every company is valued at over $1 billion just by default these days for any mining companies. I would say, yeah, I think a lot of retail investors are super excited, obviously, about Bitcoin and crypto in general, and mining companies are seen as a sort of a proxy to own Bitcoins if they don't have other ways to own Bitcoins. So I see that kind of trend continuing, although I would say it's kind of hard to raise cash through these transactions as a pipe market. It is very difficult right now. So I think it's a positive trend for the industry. On the other hand, it's I don't know how much capital they can raise through these transactions.
And I will say, as a public company, I definitely think the inorganic growth story is fascinating. It brings a lot of opportunity. Of course, with any kind of consolidation move, you can achieve, increases almost immediately as long as you can move the transactions relatively quickly. So I do feel there's going to be some significant consolidation we'll see over the next little bit. I'd love to come back to this question in a year and see if it really materializes, but for all intents and purposes, we're certainly expecting to see it.
Anyone else on that? Emma, did you have something to say?
I agree with Tanya. I'm interested to see a year from now what's going to happen, because I think 2020 is going to be very interesting. And I think you're going to see a lot of mergers and potentially acquisitions towards the mid to latter half of the year. So just because you can have a lot of companies that are going to have, they've raised money and they have machines in order, but they're not able to deploy them because of a cash crunch. So I'm really kind of looking forward to seeing what's going to happen, because I think it's going to make the industry overall more effective, more efficient. And, some of those smaller players that are really not interested and aren't able to really kind of get up to speed, they're going to go away. So I think that 2020 is going to be a very transitional year for the industry.
Yeah, I would add to that. Actually, that reminds me, one interesting to mention is some of there are a bunch of these public codes, either in OTC market or NASDAQ. Their price went up drastically in April when BTC was 65K, and since then obviously BTC recovered to over 65K when almost touched the 70K. Their stock price did not pick up at all. Some of these firms are down like 80-90% from the April peak. It's just very interesting. I think some of these are kind of Chinese, a bunch of Chinese mining companies there, but there's also a bunch of others. But I think most of them were originally Chinese mining companies. They seem to have a really difficult time to get investor interest for multiple reasons. One obviously is the migration of mining activity to US or other first world countries just takes longer than everybody hoped for, and there's also potentially distrust in terms of accounting, auditing standards. So that's a very interesting area to look out for M&A activities.
Yeah, thank you. Brian, let me go to you and ask about the narrative around the energy and carbon impacts and climate impacts of mining. There's controversy within the crypto and Bitcoin worlds on, there's a whole argument that in some ways this is good for the environment because it's creating markets for renewable energy certificates, and there's a lot of argument about it. What is your take on the cause for concern and what's going to happen in dealing with it?
Well, so Joanne, this is a great rehearsal for me because, as some of you may know, I've got to testify tomorrow morning before the House Energy and Commerce Committee on this very issue. So I'm going to try out a few themes on the group.
Excellent.
So the first thing I would say, and I would say there are probably sort of three framing issues. And as Joanne says, or knows, because we've done this 50 times before together, I never actually answer a question. I just reframe it. So let me put a frame around it. So first of all, I think the idea of focusing on how much energy any given activity uses is almost irrelevant. Not totally irrelevant, but it's almost irrelevant for several reasons. So first of all, we might care a lot if Bitcoin mining consumed 188 terawatts of coal-fired power. That might be a big deal because coal-fired plants, emit a certain amount of carbon into the atmosphere. Whereas we might not care at all if it derived all of its 188 terawatts from solar and wind. Now, neither is true, but one question is, where's the energy coming from? So when people just say it consumes a lot of energy, that is almost meaningless. It tells you almost nothing. So one question is, what is the energy mix of Bitcoin mining? It turns out that the energy mix of Bitcoin mining globally is about twice as sustainable as the mix of the overall US energy grid. So like every time you choose to use energy to wash your clothes, turn on your dishwasher, turn on a light to read a book, you're consuming grid power that is twice as dirty as the energy that Bitcoin consumes. So we start with that. But to me, as sort of a Chicago school economist, the question I always ask is, we're consuming this much energy relative to what, right? Relative to what? And the way I think about that is, what is the economic productivity per unit of energy of Bitcoin versus other things that we do in the economy? Because we do a lot of things that consume a lot more energy than Bitcoin. The question is Bitcoin a good and productive use of every unit of energy it consumes? And you can figure out that based on things like market capitalization. So, as the former banking regulator, one of the things that I looked at in preparation for tomorrow's hearing was, what's the market cap of Bitcoin relative to the market cap of the global banking system? And how much energy per $1 billion of value creation does Bitcoin use versus banking? And here's what's really interesting. I honestly didn't know this until I looked at this and had the numbers run just a few days ago. So, over the last 6 or 8 weeks, Bitcoin has floated between 800 billion and about 1.2 trillion of market cap. And the global banking system has about $8.5 trillion of market cap in it globally. That's a good measure of like value creation, right? So it turns out that to generate $1 billion of market cap, the banking system uses around 550 to 600 terawatt hours of electricity. And Bitcoin uses I should say megawatts, I think is the right frame on this, versus Bitcoin uses more like 250. So it turns out Bitcoin is weirdly a much more efficient creator of value than banking is per unit of energy consumed. You could ask the same question about lots of other activities: auto manufacturing, video gaming, retail stores, car driving. All of these things consume energy. So the question is, how much economic output are we getting for that unit of energy? It turns out Bitcoin is a super efficient way of capturing economic productivity. That's the market telling you what it's worth. So we should be asking these questions, not the others. And that's before I get to the last point, Joanne, and that has to do with the incentive effects of energy, of Bitcoin on energy markets. Bitcoin, like everybody, is looking for the cheapest source of energy. And as I think everybody else on this call knows, the cheapest source of energy in the world isn't coal, okay? The cheapest source of energy is free. And where do you find free energy? You find it in excess capacity, which can be in the form of wasted energy that is sent along transmission lines, where Bitcoin helps solve the problem by being highly mobile and locating at the production source. And it also comes from renewables, where at least as of yet, we don't have the battery technology to store most of the wasted energy from solar and wind farms globally. And so when Bitcoin shows up and says we can consume that at a penny above cost, a penny above free, basically, we can take and create incentives to build more of those kinds of renewables, which right now don't particularly have incentives to do so. That's why America has all these subsidy programs for solar and wind, is because they're not profitable. Right? I mean, like a market wouldn't supply solar because it's a highly inefficient way to generate energy unless Bitcoin mining shows up and consumes the excess and turns it profitable. So if you believe in the medium term, you want more renewables, then you need Bitcoin partners. Just ask a wind or solar farm developer. You'll find that most of them are partnering with Bitcoin to build their next project.
So if I can do it, Brian, I'm going to tune in for your hearing tomorrow, which I predict is going to be very lively.
You don't need to. You already heard it.
That was very good, Brian. Just don't forget Don't forget to mention the Christmas tree one. Everybody loves hearing about that one.
Now that was in my last written testimony. I'm told if I say that
Okay.
again, I might get disinvited, but I've written it down in my written submission.
Okay, great. So for everybody else that, they say Christmas trees, like people powering Christmas trees, that actually burns more power than Bitcoin mining, but no one's telling them, hey, it's December, don't do that, right? No. It's really just, it's really negative marketing, and we really need to change that narrative. So I'm really, really hoping that your testimony tomorrow is effective along with everybody else, because we really need to move past this. It's incorrect, and
it's all about,
it's annoying.
Don't you think it's sort of all about who decides what the most efficient use of the available energy is? Is it people through their purchasing decisions, or is it the government? I mean, like, Christmas tree lights do in fact use more energy than does Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Maybe we should tell people to turn off their Christmas tree lights, because it actually does use a lot of energy, but we don't, because we let people make choices. And it's all about a combination of people's choices in a free society and the economic productivity that markets will choose. The use we've made of Bitcoin energy has produced $1 trillion of value. That turns out to be more efficient than other sources. In a market economy, that's the end of the inquiry.
So as one of you noted earlier, we are expecting in the US to have a proposal coming out from the SEC, from Chairman Gary Gensler, requiring disclosures on ESG, including obviously the environment and climate issue. And one of the gaping holes in that world now is the difficulty of measuring, having reliable metrics on what these climate impacts actually are. Do any of you want to jump in on, do you think required disclosures are going to be inevitable? Despite the case that you make, Brian, there's a great deal of political and public concern about these issues. Like, where are we headed on the policy side with this?
I think I might have mentioned it, so I don't mind taking the first pass, but invite, of course, others to jump in. I think regulators are really thinking hard about ESG in particular. I mean, but they're not just thinking about it in the context of, our industry. They're thinking about it writ large. And I believe a lot of that has been prompted now for plus or minus 5 years. And certainly Larry Fink's efforts and a lot of large institutional investors really driving this, as well as, frankly, citizens saying, look, we want better. We're concerned about, climate change and so on. ESG is more than just climate change, of course. It's got the social and governance factors included in it. And public companies, I mean, some have uptaken the challenge already to do voluntary disclosures. So the question really becomes, what kind of metrics are we looking at? And there's a cacophony of metrics, frankly, out there that you could look to. Do they capture, in essence, whatever it is that the regulators and policymakers feel they need to know more about and want disclosed to the public markets? And then can that actually even be done? And that's where we get to kind of head scratching, and we get into like, well, are we going to aim first for scope 1, scope 2, scope 3? Well, we're not really sure. And how accurate is that reporting anyway? I think you alluded, Joanne, to the fact that it's actually not always accurate. And it depends on how you're engaging your carbon commitments and your requirements. If you are taking a top-down, bottom-up approach where you're looking internally all the way through your organization and trying to make different purchasing decisions, looking at your supply chain, looking at how you consume or create waste or wasteful products, you can do that kind of review. And certainly we've done that kind of review. I can tell you it's extensive and very time consuming. And you can equally take the other approach and say, well, we're going to buy offset credits. And then you get into discussions around, well, what is the actual source of those credits? What's the provenance of the credits? Do they stand up to the metrics and the measurements that everybody wants to know more about? Can we actually trace everything back transparently? And you get into all kinds of interesting discussions down that rabbit hole. When you're relying on grids as well that you don't control, I mean, especially in our case, you then also need to make sure that your grid suppliers are capable of providing you with transparent metrics and reporting and so on and so forth. So the reality is there's a significant amount of work to do if we're going to start imposing and mandating these kind of requirements. But at some point, something needs to start somewhere. And that's really the big question, I think, for regulators now in North America, certainly also though in Europe and across the board, thinking through, well, what are we expecting public companies to report? I can tell you up here in Canada, I mean, we've had lots of interesting conversations about this with regulators at various levels, not just federal, but also provincial and of course, even municipal. There's questions coming out around this. But it's still very much inquisitive at this point. I do think that we'll see the US take a lead, and I think that will also start to tumble reactions across certainly North America, but likely around the world. But we're watching with a very keen eye what's going to happen down in the States. And certainly, through last year, we watched Chairman Gensler make a lot of statements. There was a lot of, sort of advancement in posturing. But the reality is there's a significant amount of work to do in order to actually be able to get there in a manner that is transparent, first and foremost, but also credible, and that you can actually trace back and say, yeah, that does work. So, we took a bold step earlier this year, and I think we're one of the only miners that might have done that. So I'm not sure, I'm going to asterisk that, but we put out an ESG position, and we also put out the actual metrics framework that we're going to follow. We were, challenged earlier in the year by Elon Musk, and this was prompted by the forming of the Bitcoin Mining Council to be transparent. And, if we could just start that small step of being transparent and committing to actual reviewable metrics and make them public and known, that would actually allow for some advancement. And it was a massive undertaking to figure out where we should start. And we've publicly announced at the end of last year, we've got a phase 1 version, realizing though that over time, as we get feedback, as we get into the exercise of reporting on these metrics in a little bit, because, we've got to actually set them and then measure against them, we'll see what is actually feasible. And there will be iterations. And I think most public companies would probably share something, similar as far as their expectations go. It'll be iterative. We're all going to do our best, but we're certainly anticipating a less voluntary world, in the imminent future. But I want to kick that toward Brian, only because I know he's probably been noodling on this one too. And I'm quite curious to everybody's view. But Brian, I can kind of see you might have something to throw in there.
Yeah, I mean, look, unfortunately, we live in a fairly anti-crypto macro environment right now. Some of you will have seen that SoFi, the big lending platform, just had its bank charter approved yesterday. And it had a very curious caveat in it that's never been put in any bank charter in history. It said, we grant your bank charter with the proviso that you may not encounter or conduct any cryptocurrency related activities. So that's a strange thing, because crypto is fully legal, and under existing OCC guidance, which I am more than familiar with, cryptocurrency activities are allowed. So there's a macro environment between the ESG dimensions of Bitcoin mining and some suspicion about, I would argue, private sector finance, but certainly privately created financial networks in general, which is not in a great space. Keep in mind, however, 2022 is an election year. And while there's an emerging bipartisan consensus in favor of crypto, that consensus skews more Republican than it does Democrat. So there's a significant body of Democrats coming along and supporting, but more Republicans than Democrats as a cohort. And so following the 2022 elections, I think the political climate will change quite a bit. But right now, I couldn't agree more. I think that there's going to be some push for some kind of constraint. And I just come back to the proposition of, obviously, all of us will have to operate under whatever those constraints turn out to be as a matter of legal obligation. But at the moment, we get to have a policy voice, not just a legal voice, because the rules haven't been set. And I'm going to continue to advocate pretty vocally on behalf of the industry that we don't want industrial policy in this country. We don't want the government to allocate resources. We want markets to allocate resources based on demand and price signals. Anything else, we know from long, bitter experience of the 20th century, results in shortages, production of things people don't need, and massive inefficiencies. And that's not good for the country. People value Bitcoin. They value it enormously highly, and it's enormously productive per unit of energy expended. And so again, it isn't about how much energy Bitcoin uses. Everything we do uses energy. It's about how productive is it and how much are people willing to pay for it. And those questions have answers. Those aren't philosophy questions. They're economic questions for the good of society. So I'm going to keep making that point as long as I can stand up and make it.
So we have less than 10 minutes left, and we do have some questions coming in from the audience I want to leave time for. And I also want to say, by the way, that my organization, AIR, is partnering with Energy Web and the Rocky Mountain Institute on a voluntary effort called the Crypto Climate Accord for companies that are interested in becoming carbon neutral in what they're doing. You can find that on our website. But staying for a moment on this theme of where the public policy climate is headed, no pun intended, and what the industry should be doing to be proactive in making sure that whatever comes out of the policy pipeline makes sense. Let me ask you, Emma or Jerry, if you want to join in with some thoughts on that.
I think that you can see like the storm is coming, the tide, like it's practically here, and that crypto companies really kind of need to get in front and be at the table when decisions are being made. You don't want to be standing back going, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen, and not have a say in it. So I would encourage, different states, similar to like what Texas is doing and what other countries are doing, where you get together and you form a group and you form a committee and you look at what the government is doing and you put in your 2 cents. You say, here's what we're doing. I think it's better to self-regulate rather than be regulated. So you kind of go in there, and Tanya is smiling. Tanya, does this sound familiar to you, my friend? If you kind of go in there and you're like, this is what we are doing. Here is what, also with what Brian said, here's what the actual industry is actually generating in terms of power. Here's what we're going to do to ensure that, we're making it more sustainable. We're doing all that we can. The government will hopefully look at that, be happy, and allow you to sort of operate the way you need to. But if they do put in some regulations, at least you do want to be at the table and you're saying, okay, here's what we're doing, and sort of add your voice to what is being done. It's always better to be at the table than sitting back or standing back outside of the room and wondering what's going on until it's too late.
I want to share a question from the audience, and Jerry, let me go to you if you want to speak to this, and then also to the last question. We have a question saying the argument of Bitcoin being a subsidy for renewable energy is interesting, but is there a risk of creating a perverse incentive that would keep renewable energy with Bitcoin mining rather than going into the grid? So undermining the larger agenda of fostering more renewable energy.
So maybe I just give a couple of very quick answers, Joanne. I'm sure everybody has thoughts. So one is, that concern to me sounds a lot like the concern about high occupancy toll lanes that was a big issue in the 90s. So remember, people were concerned about Lexus lanes because they didn't think it was fair that richer people could pay to get in the left lane on the freeway. Remember that? And it's like, after a couple of years, people realized, oh, great, the rich people got out of my way and uncongested my highway. Everybody's a winner. But initially, there's this bizarre idea that somehow everything's zero sum. You know what I mean? So there's that aspect of the question. The other aspect is it assumes that somehow there's zero sum renewable energy. There's limitless renewable energy. The reason we don't have more of it is because it's a money loser. We would have many gigawatts more solar if solar made money. There is no limitation, to be super clear, on the production of wind and solar. And the point is to create economic incentives that result in the building of more of it. So it's not like Bitcoin, which only consumes about 188 terawatt hours of power a year, which is like 0.012% of American energy consumption. There's no way Bitcoin's going to consume all of the solar and wind. But if it could even result in a 10% increase in the amount of it, wouldn't that be good for everybody?
Yeah, I agree with Brian's frame, number one, wholeheartedly, and also your point on the renewable energy argument. I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you look at a Texas grid, right, many hours they sell the wind power at a negative price. Like the grid is gonna, they want to pay the producer to stop producing. So I think having a user that would make these power plants, be it wind or solar, and make them profitable or close to be more profitable, right, would be a huge accelerator for deploying more renewable energy.
And I think we're going to have to make that the last word. I would love to keep this going. I'd love to get you all to give us a round of advice, but I want to keep on time. And so if we were live, I would ask everyone to join me in thanking the panel. You've been fascinating, and obviously we have an exciting year ahead on mining. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, everyone. I enjoyed this. This is great.